Oh,
Okay,
there we
sorry
go.
about that.
That's okay. Okay, we're here.
So I'm ready. I'm
Okay.
Rebecca.
Me
Um,
too.
oh my gosh, yes, that's so funny. Rebecca's Unite. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Chicago, and I see people in Chicago and also all over Illinois through telehealth, the magic of telehealth that we're all being introduced to. and and so I specialize in treating, if we want to get really specific, millennial women, but in general, adults with people pleasing and anxiety and all of that.
So
So
pretty much like average people that just need a little help.
could be, although you would be surprised at how many people with people pleasing tendencies actually have quite a background of trauma. So I'm
Doesn't everyone have developmental trauma in some ways?
oh, sure, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
That's what I'm beginning to learn a little bit more about through this whole thing. But yeah, that's interesting. So you have a trauma background a little bit?
Yes, I am trauma informed as well. But yeah, our definition of trauma is really broadening, which has its kind of pros and cons about it, I guess. But I think that is one of the big myths about people pleasing, is people kind of can identify people pleasing behaviors on the surface, but they often don't understand sort of where they come from. And, you know, you don't necessarily have to understand that to heal, but I find for a lot of my clients, it helps them to understand that. So yeah.
So could you give a little bit more about that? Like what that might look like? Like what would a common kind of MO be for somebody who is a people pleaser?
Sure. So a people pleaser might have trouble saying no to things. They might have trouble expressing opinions, even about what some people might consider little things like, what's your favorite movie? What restaurant do you want to go to tonight? They may not really know their own wants and needs and have trouble kind of setting boundaries and limits, or even knowing where those might be. They may ignore or kind of stuff down or tamp down their emotions. They may have, you know, unusual physical symptoms that can't really be explained, like teeth grinding, migraines, neck and back pain, all of that fun stuff. And yeah, so those are some of the main things. They might be like uncomfortable making decisions or kind of indecisive. And I think a lot of that has to do with their MO is they're so used to making everybody else around them comfortable that they forget about themselves, right?
And also, I feel like maybe it's just like a previous generation thing, but it was like all about kind of being a martyr and like that whole mentality of like you put everybody else first, and you know, and that's what a good person does, and you know, you share your toys even if it's developmentally appropriate not to, like, you know, like those kinds of things, and like kind of pushing people in. Like I feel like that was a very common thing in the last generation. So like how did that, like, do you see that there's like a whole, it's a generational shift, or are there people that you see, I don't know, I'm not formulating my question very well, but maybe you know what I'm trying to ask.
I know what you're saying. Like, is there a generational difference? I think, you know, I see people pleasers of all ages. I think what the difference is a little bit is, I think at least, you know, millennials and I always confuse Gen X and Gen Z, which are the younger ones. Is it Z?
I don't even know what
Yeah, I think it's millennial and Gen Z. So I think in those generations, like, parents were finally starting to understand that, oh, we have a real responsibility and role in our children's emotional development. Now, a lot of parents still didn't know that, don't know that now, but it was even worse, you know, the farther you go back, the worse it gets with that, because I think parents much more used to have the mentality of, well, if you put food on the table, like, you're doing your job, and you know, your kid will be fine. You got to make sure you toughen them up. And so in that
or you
sense,
do everything for them. There's like that other extreme, like you do, like literally like build like padded walls and ceilings around them, which is probably equally as damaging. I don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it teaches them, oh, I'm incapable. I can't do things for myself. I can't make decisions for myself. So either extreme is difficult.
So pretty much the idea is finding balance. Is that like the key that, you know, people to kind of figure out between being like a doormat and a people pleaser, like people pleaser is the same thing as doormat. I mean, kind of like self I don't know, I'm so
approved.
Sorry. Self-assured and people pleaser. So like that idea is to find balance, because you don't want to be like a stingy person. So how do you find that balance?
You know, I think it's really difficult because it's all up to you, right? And people pleasers aren't used to looking inward or looking at themselves into what they want and need. And so the challenge is really, you know, how can I start to feel safe enough to do that? And like that in itself is such a big hurdle. And to then, because I think when a lot of people think about people pleasing, the first thing they go to is assertiveness. Just say no more. Just say what you want more. And like, yes, you want to get there, but that's like as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the journey. Like before you even start thinking about that, you have to start thinking about self-compassion, self-care, like what actually are my needs, and feel safe enough to do all of that. Like those are the first kind of steps to take towards getting a balance.
And then there's a lot of the hurdles would be kind of like guilt and shame, because
yes,
because I can imagine like I feel like parents who brought their children up to be those martyrs, or you know, kind of, you know, hug your grandmother because she wants you to, and you know, to do all of it. Like there's a lot of guilt and shame in not towing the line and doing what you're told. And even if you do learn as an adult to stand your ground and make your own decisions, there's still that, am I being selfish? Am I?
yes,
No. So how do you identify that?
well, so I think the first thing that you have to learn is just that it's not selfish to have your own wants and needs, and it's part of your responsibility to look out for those. Because when you're not able to look out for those, so like we kind of talked about like what happens on the surface with people pleasing, right? You have trouble saying no, you have trouble expressing your opinions, and so you might hear those and go, oh, that doesn't sound so bad, right? And it's not until it is, you know, like it's, the problem is when you hold your own wants and needs and emotions in for years and years and years and don't let them come out, you start to feel really resentful, really bitter, really angry with people, and that builds up and it comes out in all these sort of ways. Often it comes out as passive aggression, right? Like kind of secretly getting back at people, or, oh, you're not going to do this for me, well, I won't do this for you, kind of things like that. Or it leads to just total burnout from all of the overwhelm of taking on all this emotional baggage from other people and then having nothing to do, not knowing what to do with it, right? And so like, that's why it's so important, kind of more of those long-term effects for people pleasers, to seek therapy, you know, get self-care, build an affirming community of people who are gonna, you know, understand and respect their boundaries and all of that. Sorry, I feel like I went off on a tangent. Should I answer your question?
No. Like, I think it's really important information. Somebody asked, is people pleasing, does it have the same roots as perfectionism?
I think there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap with perfectionism and a lot of overlap with codependency as well. I think the overlap with perfectionism is this idea that, you know, I have to make sure the other people around me are comfortable. and that we're all in harmony. And if we're not, then, oh, is it something that I'm doing wrong? Did I not say or do the right thing? And then it can get very perfectionistic very quick, because you're kind of blaming yourself for things not going smoothly, when, you know, what you learn in therapy is a lot of that stuff is out of your control and not your responsibility.
I think the hardest thing is not owning other people's feelings. And I don't think that people really get that that's what they're doing until they've started to do the work.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So what would you say to somebody who hasn't done the work to help them kind of identify when that's the case? Like when something's just not sitting right, and with like if that's I'm so tongue-tied. Like how do you know that that's what you're doing when you're trying to, you know, when somebody's mad at you? Like what's the division of responsibility, and how do you know if it's people pleasing or if you're owning their feelings and what's right? Like I feel like the line gets blurred because you don't know what's right and wrong.
Absolutely.
When you're so used to that. So how do you
Absolutely. And it is really challenging, right? And I think
right.
For me, you know, I'm a recovering people pleaser, which is also partly why this work, you know, I feel so passionately about it. And I think I work really well with people pleasers because I've been there. So like, I get it. And I think for me, like therapy was just such an important piece of the work for me, because I had to have somebody kind of guide me through getting back in touch with my intuition. Because I think for a lot of people pleasers, that's what's missing, is I don't have my own, I can't get in touch with my own compass of what feels right to me and what feels wrong to me, because I've been so, like, I've had these horse blinders on. I've just been looking at other people. And so that's like, you know, of course I'm going to promote therapy because I'm a therapist and that's like my thing. And so I have a bias, but I think for people pleasers, especially, therapy is so important, because where else in your life can you get that hour every week where it's just about you, and you don't have to feel guilty because you're paying and you still might, right? But like, you're paying the person, this is their profession, they're here to help you and focus on you. And so that's why I feel like therapy just is so key to all of this.
So, okay, I have another question.
Okay.
So on the surface level, people pleasing might sound like a good thing, right? Like people might be looking at this as a topic and thinking, oh, what's wrong with people pleasing? That's like a really good thing, right? So how does it go bad? Like at what point does it become a problem?
So I think a couple things happen. So one way that clients often come to me where it's at the point of people pleasing is they have these very out of character anger outbursts. And they go like, what? I don't know why I'm acting like this. Like, I'm not this person. Like, I don't do this. But it's happening because, again, they've been holding so much in for so long that it has to go somewhere. So that's one way that it goes wrong, and that people kind of come knocking at my door like, oh, hey, I need help with this, because they're having these anger outbursts, they're hurting people in their life. And then, of course, because they're people pleasers, they're feeling insanely guilty about it. And it's just like this self-perpetuating cycle. The other thing that happens sometimes is that people feel emotionally distant from others. They might have difficulty with intimacy. And that's because, again, like, if you're not able to express your true feelings to other people, like, they're not going to really know who you are. And so people might feel this sense of like emptiness or meaninglessness in their relationships that's like really hard to pin down. And it's like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. When I think sometimes people pleasers feel that way because, again, like they haven't been able to be their true selves. They haven't felt safe to be their true selves, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, obviously there's going to be, you know, you go to therapy, there's going to be challenges. what would be like the main thing that you would start to work on? Like, obviously there will be pushback from external, from, you know, parents or bosses, or when you're starting to put up boundaries. And so how would you kind of get people through that initial hurdle of setting boundaries and not feeling totally isolated from their people, from their surroundings? Because they're probably surrounded by people pleasers, right? By people who take advantage of the people pleasing, right?
Absolutely. And even if they're not people who take advantage of it, like, people get used to the way things are in a relationship. They come to expect things, and then when that changes and they don't get what they expect from you or what you usually provide, they're mad. And, you know, it's understandable, because people don't like change. It's uncomfortable. It's ugh. And so that's going to be, I mean, so I think this is a great point, and I think this is why I don't immediately jump into that with clients, right? First, we look at the self-care, self-compassion. I also use a lot of mindfulness in my practice. So really getting back into your body, learning how to name your emotions, what the emotions feel like in your body. Like, that's the type of stuff I do first to kind of lay the groundwork. And then when we have a real good sense of that, that's when we can start to work on some of the assertiveness and the saying no, because then we have that foundation there that, you know, like, yes, some people may disappear, this might happen, but you have the tools to get through this. You understand yourself better. So, yeah.
And yeah, so do you find that people, that one of their biggest hurdles is that they end up isolating themselves from people, and then once you're at that point, like, I feel like, do they have like buyer's remorse, or, you know, like that kind of
Totally. Yes. Yeah. And I think too, you know, we all know, well, maybe not we all know, but recovery is a process. It's not linear. And so definitely people will sometimes start to set boundaries and all of a sudden go, oh my God, this isn't working. People aren't responding the way I wanted them to. And they'll kind of pull it back. And, you know, that's okay. That's all part of it. And a lot of times, you know, when we think about setting boundaries and being more assertive, we're thinking about these really firm things like, you can never call me again, or da 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 da. But boundaries are always sort of this push and pull and kind of finding what's going to work. And so I don't know where I was going with that thought, but I guess like,
so that it's fluid, like the boundaries.
Yes.
You have to find the, you know, the sweet spot.
Yeah. But I also think that's a really good point about, you know, because it is like, sometimes when you start setting firmer boundaries with people disappear. And that's really hard because we don't want people to be isolated. Also, though, it's all part of the process of finding the people who are going to really be there for you and not just what you can do for them. So as challenging as it is, like, it's got to be done, right? And it doesn't have to be done all at once. It can be little steps. It can be a process. It can look, you know, how it has to look.
Right. So it's not a cut and dry kind of thing. It's pretty tailored to the individual.
Totally. And again, it doesn't have to. It could look like completely cutting people out of your life, but it could also look like, I'm going to pull back on the amount of effort I'm putting into this relationship. And then we'll kind of see where we are. And then sometimes things kind of naturally evolve from that, right? So it can look a lot of different ways.
So what would be the most, I'm just curious, what's like the most common type of relationship that gets worked on in therapy when it comes to people pleasing and boundaries? And I'm just curious if it's like a lot of people who are having work burnout, or people who are dealing with parents or spouses or children, or
Gosh, you know, it's a hard question to answer because a lot of times people pleasing impacts all those relationships. I would say a lot of times with parents, and I think part of that is because, you know, a lot of times that's where these tendencies come from, is our family of origin and our childhood problems. And so like with parents, it seems to be one of the toughest relationships to do some of that stuff with, because again, there's so much guilt. There's, well, these people raised me, they gave me A, B, and C, like how can I possibly, and then sometimes your parents are even saying that to you. How can you do this to me? You're my daughter, you're my son, you're my whatever. Like,
And also
so
there's like a respect for your elders.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
it's a tough one.
It is. So I don't know what the most common is, but that seems to be the most delicate, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be like a few tools that you would give somebody, like, to, you know, get them started and on how to identify what types of boundaries need to be set in order to be a little bit more self-assured and
Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest things is helping people look at when and where and with whom are you feeling irritated or angry? Like, when is that emotion coming up, and like learning how to identify that. And then often that will point you in the direction of, oh, every time I'm around Karen from the office, I get a headache or I feel irritated or these symptoms happen. And it's almost like a working backward process of, oh, if that happens every time around Karen, maybe that means she's crossing a boundary. Okay, what boundary can I set then around that? So yeah. So it all goes back to emotions.
and then also at the beginning you mentioned that a lot of it would have to do with someone's history, right? With
mm-hmm.
like maybe that's actually triggering something from their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So like what type, like, would you kind of try to help them get to a place to discover like when they felt something similar when they were younger, and does it matter what age that they're like, how far back do you go? I don't know, like, can you describe that process a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think exactly the way you said it, like some of these issues that are happening currently, I would say, does this remind you of anything that's happened in your past or like a situation that's happened before? And a lot of times at first people are like, no, and then they'll kind of think about it and they'll go, well, there was this one time, and yeah, it could be any age. I mean, it could be from childhood, it could be from last week, you know, but I think part of what we're doing is, so people pleasers often become people pleasers. There's this thing about like death by 1,000 cuts. Have you ever heard that?
No.
So it's like, there may not have been one big traumatic or abusive thing that happened to you. There may have just been all these little times.
Oh, right. Small T traumas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. When you were misunderstood or ignored or invalidated in some way, and you might not even recognize them as being influential into your behavior now or your emotions now, but like, because of my background, I can help you see how they're connected, right? And so, again, I lost where I was going, but
No, that makes complete sense, because actually we did a live with actually two people, Brooklyn Moskowitz and also Esther Goldstein, talked about big T trauma and small T trauma, and kind of I can't remember which one said that it was that the big T trauma is like, you know, the obvious traumas that we think about as traumas, and then the small T traumas is like kind of like little, like, I mean, you described it as cuts, but like little taps, like over and over and over, that like start to form cracks. And that's why, like, you know, people who think of trauma as big trauma don't really understand the connection between that and like the small T, like the kind of, I guess it's developmental trauma.
right. So like, for example, I can't even, oh man, it's hard to think of an example, but maybe you know, when you were really little, you came up to your mom and you were crying, and your mom said, stop crying, go to your room. And at the time, you know, or even now, you might not see that as trauma, but what it is, it's she wasn't able to acknowledge and validate your feelings. And so what you were taught is, my feelings don't matter. I need to go and be alone to deal with them. Like, I shouldn't bother anybody with them, right? And I think the thing that's so weird about it is, like, so many people pleasers will come to me and say, but I had a great childhood. There was nothing wrong with my childhood. My parents were really loving, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it was a happy home. But then when you kind of start uncovering some of this stuff, it's like, oh, I see now how that was one of the things that sort of led me down this path to the behavior I have now.
So, I mean, they're not bad parents. It's just like
No.
unintentional, you know, this is how they were brought up. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, stop being a baby, you know, toughen up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let me be clear too that, you know, a lot of people pleasers did have bad parents, did have big T traumas,
Right.
but I think I'm talking about some of the little T traumas because that's the part that people don't recognize as often, and that's a little bit more hidden. So, but I just want to put that up there as a disclaimer, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so how do you start feeling more self-assured on a regular basis?
Oh my gosh, great question. I think it's about making space for yourself in your life, whether that's, you know, doing more of the things that you actually want to be doing, giving yourself the love and the validation and the appreciation that you really crave from other people. And, you know, whether that's like writing about it in a journal, writing affirmations on stickies and putting them around the house, guided meditation. I mean, there's a million and one ways to do that, right? It's just kind of figuring out what works for you. But and I think too, what is helpful is understanding why you've made the decisions that you've made in your life, and understanding that there were really good reasons for, you know, why you've done the things you've done, why you felt the way you felt. And if you don't understand what those reasons are, like, thinking about it, exploring it, talking to a therapist about it until you realize, like, it all makes sense. I make sense.
Yes. Actually, last week was the interview was about the importance of no, it was a few weeks ago, about validation, and the importance of it in the therapeutic process.
Mm-hmm.
And how, like, it's all like that's and just kind of I can't remember how at the time I tied into your point. Oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Sorry, everyone. But I'm human.
Oh, validation, yeah. And I think
right.
You're right. And I think a lot of times, I think that we're so judgmental of ourselves and other people for needing validation, but like, we all need it. It's very important. And not a lot of times, not until you get it from other people can you kind of conjure it in yourself. You know what I mean?
So if you didn't have that as a child, how could you get that?
I think just by looking at why your emotions and behaviors make sense. Why did I make this decision? Putting more emphasis on your opinions and beliefs about yourself versus other people's opinions and beliefs about you, which is so difficult. But I think it's also about recognizing that you know yourself better than anybody. And so if Joe Blow, who you've met 3 times, comments on your Instagram and says you're stupid, like, that guy doesn't know you, right?
What if it's somebody that really does that is a big part of your life, and they're kind of like, let's say you set up these boundaries, and you know, and you've done what you need to do for yourself, and the people around you really just they're, you know, let's say somebody like a sibling or a parent or something really doesn't approve of it and really lays the guilt trip on, or, you know, and then you start to think, well, maybe my boundaries are too firm, and, you know, and then you start second guessing yourself, and then you start having all those, like, you know, stomach pains and back, whatever you were saying before. So it's really hard to know whether you're kind of being too hard or not hard enough. And
I know. And I think part of that for me was just like, and part of what I help my clients understand is that boundaries are really messy and they can change. And, you know, you may decide, maybe my boundaries are too firm, let me loosen them up. And then you loosen them up, and then that person hurts you again, or it goes, you know, sideways. And then you go, well, got to firm them up again. And it's like I used to have this idea of boundaries as being like, you have to set your boundaries in the beginning, and then that's how they have to be forever. And it's opposite. Like, it's like, there's no set of rule book of like, this is the one way to do it, you have to do it like this. Like, it's just so dependent on every person. And then it also changes over time with different people at different times. And like, that can feel really overwhelming, but it also can kind of take some of the pressure off you. Like, oh, no wonder I'm confused. Like, this is a very fluid process, right?
that must be very hard for people who are more black and white thinkers.
Oh, yes.
Because there's no written rules.
Yes. I have a background in dialectical behavioral therapy as well.
Oh, really?
I don't really advertise that, only because I don't have a DBT group and I don't want to like see people for DBT without DBT. Anyway, but I will sometimes use handouts from DBT to kind of explain those things of like, you know, dialectics. And, but you're right. I think that can be challenging for people pleasers. That can be really challenging for perfectionists. Like, what do you mean there's no rules?
Right. Like, a lot of people that I know are very rule oriented, black and white, and these kinds of fluid boundaries, and like it doesn't. It's like a foreign concept. I think there's like a type. Like, somehow I end up being around a lot of people who are very black and white. So I see that a lot. And
yeah,
it's confusing because you're so used to rules, and that this is like unwritten rules, and oh no, I don't have like a different playing field.
It's really an entirely different way of looking at the world, which is like it's pretty terrifying. Like, it's a lot to take in, you know. I wouldn't just throw all that on someone in the first session, because it's, you know, because our world is really run by rules and black and white rules, and that's how, you know, leaders lead and people think, and so to introduce this whole different mindset around it, it's a big deal. I definitely would not lead with that.
And you know what I like about this topic is also, you don't really need to have a mental illness to be proactive in this, and in kind of, this is self-care, right? So,
and you know, certainly I think a lot of people with anxiety and depression have people-pleasing tendencies. Like, people with all different kinds of mental illness have it, but you're right that also people who wouldn't necessarily have a DSM diagnosis could be people pleasers too.
Yeah, so I feel like that it's a great way to get your feet wet with, you know, mental health. If, you know, if you want to work on it, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and, you know, I think this is a great place to start, I feel like.
And I know it sounds like, if I made it sound big or scary or really overwhelming, like, I know it sounds like that, but you really do take it step by step, situation by situation. And the more that you are able to, you know, act in alignment with your own values and with what you really believe, like, you get more and more confidence, and it gets easier.
So you brought up a really good point. So, values. So would that kind of be the place to start? Like, what would be this?
That would be a really good place to start, I think, because if you are are clear on your own values, that helps you sort of set up a
framework.
Yeah, a framework for, you know, I can go back and look at this and say, well, does this behavior that this other person is doing or I'm doing align with my values? And if not, what boundaries do I need to set around that so that I feel like I'm living more in alignment with what I believe? And so I think that's a really good way to go, because again, it's making sure that you're putting yourself and your beliefs front and center. And like with values, it's not black and white either, right? People have all different types of values all over the map, and yours may be different from other people's. But if you have that to go back to, that can feel like a solid, concrete thing to help you kind of navigate these decisions.
And then if your values conflict with other people's values, so, and then there's this whole, you know, and you're trying to people please. So that's a tough one, but I guess
it is tough. It is tough.
Would you have any book recommendations for people who you know want to learn more about it? And
yes, not specifically people pleasing, but the biggest book I would recommend is called hold on, what is it called?
Author?
Oh my God, I can see the cover in my brain. Hold on, I'm gonna figure this out. Running on Empty. Oh, there we go. So,
Running on Empty. That sounds interesting. I want to read it.
Yes, it is by, she has a weird name, Jonice Webb, PhD. And I have been listening to the ebook, and it's so amazing because, so again, I think a lot of the roots of people pleasing come from emotional neglect and trauma in childhood. And she really breaks down all of the different, you know, types of families that tend to create people-pleasing tendencies in people, like the different behaviors. She's very non-judgmental of like both the families and the people who are coming in to see her. Like she has like, I haven't seen these because it's a audio book, but she has like specific worksheets you can do. Like it's fantastic. So there's a lot more in that book than just people pleasers. There's like all different kinds of stuff that she talks about, but
oh, that sounds really good.
It's really good.
When I'm finished my pile of books, I will order that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you get a recommendation every week so you have like
I try to
a stack getting bigger and bigger?
I try to, but I'm so behind in my books, but I'm getting there, plowing through. But I read a lot about developmental trauma, so that's why I think that's a really fascinating topic that I think that people should just know about in general.
Yeah.
Like I really think that I also think that we should call it something different and not trauma, because people are scared of the word trauma, and like I feel like it's even though it's the right word, I feel like it's people don't associate with it because they're like, oh well, I never, you know, was in a bomb scare, or like, you know, and I never got attacked. So like I can't even associate with trauma. Like I never lived through the Holocaust. I don't, you know, I don't have trauma. But
you know, I think there's still that stigma for so many things. Like I know so many people who can't bring themselves to say they have anxiety, but they can say I'm really stressed. But the word anxiety has this like connotation with it they don't want. You know, there's like so many different things like that. And I think the more that we can talk about them and the more that we can have like accounts like yours that like put mental health people at the center and make us more accessible, like I think we're moving in the right direction with that stuff. So thank you.
I think so. Okay, so I think I can't even see what time it is. Okay.
I think it's 8:41.
Oh, okay. Well, so we have a little bit more time. So if there's any questions people could ask, do you have any other ideas that you wanted to cover?
Well, one thing I was going to say is I think that, like many behaviors, people pleasing is an adaptation to some of these traumas we have survived in childhood, and it helped us get by. And so, again, like I think we really are really harsh on ourselves for some of these things, and like I know when I was putting the pieces together, realizing I was a people pleaser, I was like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I must have such low self-esteem. That's terrible, blah, blah, blah. And like, you just have to remember that like you got these behaviors for a reason, and they helped you at the time. And now what we're doing in therapy is we're just helping you add some tools to your tool belt, create more effective ways of moving about the world. But it's not about like shaming you or judging yourself for these behaviors, because people only engage in behaviors that benefit them in some way. So like if you develop these behaviors, like there's a benefit to them, right?
Well, they were probably really adaptive. They were probably advanced when you were younger and you learned them, and you figured out how to use them. They were probably very adaptive and helpful.
Yeah, and like you said, and like I read a post recently that was talking about how, you know, there are a lot of really wonderful things about people pleasing. Like it is a good thing to think about other people and want to make people comfortable. It's just that when it starts to interfere with different areas of your life, that's when we really want to look at it and kind of take a step back and go, how can we help you be more effective through all of this, right?
It's kind of like triaging.
Okay, say more.
So when I was like trying to figure out how to balance my life, and like let's say there was 10 things on my plate, so I would triage them and figure out, okay, well, so here's my values. This is according to my value system, this is the highest priority, right? And this is the next highest priority, and these are like important, but they don't fall within the like highest priorities of my life. And although I don't like to disappoint people, and I don't like it when people are mad at me, and I don't like it when people are sad. Like, I have to triage and do like usually like your nuclear family, yourself, your nuclear family, like so I don't know, I
like prioritizing like that.
Yeah, like like when you go into hospital and you go into the triage, and they kind of like put everybody in order of priority of like of urgency. And so that's kind of like how I think about it in my head now, is like, yeah, well, that's a cut finger is not as significant as a heart attack, so I'm going to deal with the heart attack first, and then you know what I mean, like so I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, that's exactly it. It's like we're not, like, our goal in therapy is not to just like nuke all your people pleasing behaviors. Like, we don't have to do that. Like, instead it's kind of looking back at the big picture and going, okay, in this specific situation, what's more important? Is it easier and okay to just kind of go with the flow and, yeah, we can see the movie you want to see? Or is this something that's been a pattern for a long time and it's bugging you and you just really want to say something, and then you do it? And so it all comes back to you and your values and what makes sense. And it's, so again, we're trying to go to gray thinking instead of black and white.
Right. And then the person who you're going to the movie is, why are you being such a baby about it? like, what's the big deal? And you're like, oh my gosh, like I've gone to every movie that you like give me one. And yeah, I've seen that a lot.
Well, and the other thing too is you start with the kind of like with exposure, like you start with less traumatizing things and move up to more difficult things, right? So if the hardest person to set boundaries with is your mom, you're not going to start practicing that with your mom. You're going to start with your very best friend who's very, very understanding and sympathetic, but whom you still have a really hard time not people pleasing with. You start with that person, and then you know, kind of move your way up. So
that makes sense. Practice.
Mm-hmm.
Practice makes better.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. You had more things that
Did I have more things? So yeah, I just wanted to say it's adaptive. So if you're a people pleaser, try not to judge yourself, because there's a really good reason why you developed these behaviors, and we don't have to get rid of them all at once. I think that's kind of it.
Thank you so much. I feel like this was a very important topic.
Yeah,
Not
me
really
too.
talked about. It was a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and it's not, you know, it's not like a clinical term, right? Like, and so I think sometimes people get flack from other, like, I haven't gotten flack from other therapists, but I can see other therapists kind of being like, people pleasing, what is that, right? That's not in the DSM. But like, as far as I'm concerned, it's a thing because I went through it. I see other people go through it. So, you know, I think
it's not in DSM, but it's kind of maybe a symptom.
Yeah, I see it as, man, we should have started with this, huh? I see it as a set of behaviors. Yeah, I see it as like a set of behaviors that, you know, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. All right, and if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Do you answer, like, how do you mind if people message you on Instagram, or would you prefer?
I prefer that people call me or email me. All of that info is in my profile, because it's more secure than Instagram messaging. And then also I don't want to give the impression that I'm providing therapy through Instagram, because I'm not. Like, this was all, like, all the stuff I'm doing on Instagram is just for information, but it's not a substitute for therapy, because therapy can really be tailored to you and your specific issues. Whereas a lot of the stuff we're talking about on here is so generic that, like, it may or may not apply to you, and you kind of have to be the judge of that. But
okay, so
that was a really long way of saying call me or email me.
Okay, and your information is in your bio.
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca. From one Rebecca to another. Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for coming. And hopefully it'll save and be on YouTube in the next few days.
Okay, hopefully.
All right, hopefully. Doesn't always. But,
thank you.
All right, thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.